Hi, and welcome to Ask Cam. We're here to talk about housing issues this evening. So thank you, anyone who is joining us. For those of you who have tuned into previous lives, you'll know this is my usual blurb, but you will also know my face, and I am Rosie. I'm our Partnership and Communications Lead here at Citizens Advice Manchester. I'm going to ask my lovely guests to introduce themselves, going sort of clockwise or anti-clockwise around the screen. So, Vicky, I'm going to come to you first.
Hi, Rosie. So I'm Vicky Green, one of the specialist housing caseworkers here at CAM.
Wonderful. Harry?
Hi, I'm Harry. I work on the advice line doing generalist advice, which also covers housing.
And finally?
Hi, my name is Christy and I work on the Manchester advice line doing the same as Harry, generalist advice, and same really.
Wonderful, thanks guys. So as I said, this evening we are going to be covering private renters issues specifically. So like some of that will kind of go into housing in general, but like we know that private renters specifically probably get a little bit less support from their landlords as maybe people living in social housing would get. So we thought it was really important to put some messages out there, particularly as we know that that sort of we've had a pause on eviction proceedings that is sort of being extended and has been extended again till the end of May. But we know that that is kind of that the end of that pause is looming. And that people living in private rented accommodation might be feeling a little bit nervous right now and not sure about what help they can get and how they can get it. So I thought it was really valuable to have you all here. So, Vicky, first and foremost, I wanted to come to you just to sort of understand a bit more about our housing specialists and what is it that you guys look after when it comes to housing specialist advice?
So there'll be certain categories that will be referred to the specialist team. Our advice line staff can obviously take calls on any sort of housing issue. Then there'll be certain categories that will get passed on to the specialist team. And those will be categories of work that are covered by legal aid agency funding. So largely it's any threat to loss of home, basically. So anybody who has received any type of notice from their landlord, whoever that landlord may be, and for whatever reason. So it might be rent arrears, it might be breach of tenancy, it might be allegations of antisocial behaviour, but whatever the reason, if there is some threat of loss of home for a tenant, then that is usually referred to our specialist team for special advice and representation if needed. That's probably the biggest area. We also deal with homelessness cases, so that will mainly be where a local authority has made a negative homeless decision and somebody will need assistance challenging that decision. Also areas of disrepair, so lots of people living in accommodation where the landlord is refusing to complete repairs. If that's a situation where it's an extensive or serious repair causing a threat to health or safety, that is usually passed on for a specialist housing issue and we can help people with that. Also any harassment or unlawful eviction being carried out by a landlord as well, we can give specialist advice with that area, and any proceedings against anybody for antisocial behaviour, whether that's the landlord trying to get an injunction or, as I said earlier, taking possession for antisocial behaviour allegations, that as well.
Great. So there's a whole load of things there that we can help with. And obviously, as Vicky said, the stuff that kind of comes in almost before that, before someone gets up to a specialist housing advice that Harry and Christy will know more about. I should have said as well when I did my introduction, I utterly failed, is that obviously we are taking people's questions live this evening. So if you do have a question for any of our advisors, please do type those in and they'll come up for us. We'll try our best to get them answered for you. So as I said there, Harry, Christy, prior to somebody getting to Vicky and the specialist housing advice, I think you guys will pick up questions and answer queries about sort of anything and everything to do with private renting or housing in general up to that point. When it comes to private renters, what are the issues and the problems that you're seeing most frequently when people call advice line? I'm going to ask Harry first.
Yeah, so it's kind of everything up until, I suppose, what Vicky went through there. It tends to be a lot of things surrounding, obviously, minor repairs can be a big one, sort of delay in repairs. So if the landlord, for example, isn't replying to messages, or letting agent, for example, things to do with deposit either disputes or returning deposits, or sometimes even actually acquiring deposits tends to come under it as well. As well as that, there's things like dealing with the rent increases, like the legality surrounding that. Can a landlord put the rent up? How much by? What can you do about it? Things like that. And generally, just sort of, I don't want to say smaller scale, but things to do with, like, is a landlord entering without permission, for example, or tenancy agreements, sort of law surrounding that, sign up tenancies, joint tenancies, terminating tenancies early, things like that. I think, Christy, you had some more as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of things. Something that I am noticing quite a lot recently, to be honest, is a lot of benefit claimants. So a lot of people that claim benefits are being refused private housing. They're not really meant to do it, but there's a lot that we've learned, really, that it's not really as simple as just a landlord saying, I'm not going to accept you because you claim benefits. A lot of it also, a lot of things that we do find is infestations. A lot of people that are privately renting have an issue with infestations. And again, they have rights to get to that a landlord really should be resolving the issue, and they're just finding that they're not really getting any further with it. A lot, again, like what Harry's mentioned, really, it is mainly at the moment I'm finding that personally is things like rent increases, evictions, and also the correct process for that eviction as well. I think that's probably a lot of what is scaring clients at the moment, is a lot of people are facing eviction. And not just that, something I found that has come up is a lot of people are being told they're going to get evicted, but they're not being issued a correct notice, which is then meaning that they're scared. They're scared they're going to lose their home. They're not sure what to do. They've got kids. They've got all these things they're worried about. But they haven't received the correct notice, meaning we then can't progress it onto Vicky because they've not received something that would allow us to do so. So it's things, I think a lot of people are being threatened for things that aren't being done the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like quickly then, how do people know almost what the right notice is, and what if they've not had it, how do they sort of challenge that to say that they need the correct notice?
I think, sorry, I'll just jump in here. I think any type of notice that somebody receives can be referred to our team, just to clarify. So, and then it would be part of the advice that we give that notice is or isn't valid. Obviously, if the notice isn't valid, then the person is given the advice at that stage, and the case wouldn't go any further legally, or if it did, we would have a defence to that action. But the notice wouldn't necessarily have to be a correct notice to be passed on to our team. So if it was an obvious at an eviction notice, then you.
Oh, I think you're breaking up a little bit, Vicky. So we're going to hopefully sort of keep hold of you, because I know that you were having some slight issues before we connected. But so basically, I think the gist of what you were saying there, Vicky, is that essentially,
can you hear me?
no matter what. Sorry. Okay.
I can hear you okay. Can you not hear me?
I think, we can hear you now. So I didn't know if there was maybe a delay. That sometimes these technical issues do like to come along and plague us in these things. You're not the first, and I'm sure you won't be the last. But essentially, so the gist is that if you received any kind of notice, to check it out with us, because like you say, we will be able to tell you whether or not that's the correct notice. We can escalate that accordingly, and if you're if you do need further advice or further support to challenge an incorrect notice, then we can help with that as well. So if you've got any queries at all about receiving whatever your landlord has told you in terms of eviction, it's always worth giving us a call to check out exactly what your rights are, and how we can support you in those circumstances. Sort of following on from that theme of eviction and people feeling a little bit worried about losing their home, I guess what we are seeing a lot of people sort of starting to call us about are people who are struggling to keep up with their bills, and eventually that and while rent is often for a lot of people it's their priority bill, it's still eventually it becomes difficult to keep up with your rent payments as well. So if somebody misses and lives in a private rented property, misses a rent payment, could they be at risk of eviction immediately, or is that kind of is there a bigger process to it than that? What are the rules there?
Yeah, so I think we use the word eviction a lot, but I think it's important to remember that the eviction is the last stage of a process. So the notice is something that the tenant would receive first. There would have to be court action in order for the landlord to obtain a possession order. Then an eviction notice is the last stage. It's probably worth mentioning at this stage that the ban that everybody's hearing about, this ban on evictions, at the moment is a ban on the actual eviction stage that's been extended to the 31st of May. So there is no ban on notices being served and on possession claims being issued at court and possession orders being made by the court. It's that last step of the eviction process that's on a ban. So that's why it is important for people when they're receiving the notices to get advice early, because all of that stage before the eviction notice is still going ahead. I mean, to answer your question, I say no, it isn't that a tenant could miss one rental payment and automatically be evicted. There is always a process of a notice period and a possession order. But the steps that a landlord would have to take to carry out an eviction will differ depending on the type of tenancy, the level of the arrears, what the tenancy agreement says. So again, it's just on a case-by-case basis. It's important for people to get advice early on. Usually the landlords will have greater powers and shorter notice periods the higher the level of arrears, but that's a general comment to make. It does depend upon the type of notice and type of tenancy.
Yeah, okay. So as you say, there's sort of that big process. And Harry and Christy, are you finding then that a lot of people are being sort of contacting us now with sort of they've had that initial notice, or they've had some form of initial notice, even if it's not quite correct?
Some people I'm finding at the moment are just getting a phone call, or even I've had clients that have just had a slip of paper passed to them saying you need to leave. It doesn't really explain much. So yeah, I think a lot of clients at the moment are receiving things like that.
Yeah, it's worrying, and I think people have heard in the news that this is eviction ban. Some people think they don't need to do anything about it because they've heard that, when obviously there is things we can do and advice we can give before that stage. But even that bit of paper is not going to be a valid notice, but it's still it's still notice of the landlord's intention of what they intend to do. So it's still important to get advice at that stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as we often say in these kind of situations, if in doubt, give us a call. We're never going to be angry to have heard from you and to be able to clear something up really quickly. Like that's the worst case scenario, if you like, is that we're going to be able to answer your question and put your mind at ease very quickly. And in the best case, we're going to be able to plug you into some really great specialist advice to support you. So I'm just going to add that juncture, I am just going to pop up a little banner underneath us there, just as a reminder that is that's our advice line number. So you can call that for free, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And we've got our website as well. So we do also offer interventions such as web chat. We offer advice via Messenger. We offer video advice as well, so if you'd rather have like a face-to-face conversation with somebody, you can book in to speak to an advisor face-to-face. So again, you can find all of those interventions at our website. So if you do need support, please do get in touch, and I'll just leave that up there for a little bit while we keep chatting. And please do, as I say, do keep typing your questions into the chat box if you have anything that you'd like to ask our advisors. Having talked briefly about homelessness or about eviction and sort of what might come next, I think obviously everyone then talks about thinks about homelessness, and it's sort of a big jump to go from one to the other. But I think just to sort of highlight maybe some of the issues around what homelessness looks like. So actually, we often think about homelessness as like sort of street homelessness, but when else might somebody sort of want to consider themselves homeless, and what might the processes be if that's a very clear question? I'm going to throw that to oh sorry, there you go, Vicky.
Go on, no, go ahead.
No, I was literally just going to pick one of you to ask, so Vicky, you go for it.
I'm sure the others have got more insight into what people's initial questions are, but I was just going to say that the local authorities' duties to people who are homeless extend also to people who are threatened with homelessness. So there's not only people, as you say, when you think of homelessness, you might think of street homelessness, but there are duties owed to people who are threatened with homelessness. So again, if you're getting any sort of notice, as well as getting advice, you should be making an application to the council and triggering those initial duties to receive assistance even before an eviction could happen. But aside from being threatened with homelessness, somebody might be considered homeless, for example, if they're living in a property that it isn't reasonable for them to continue living in. So it's not just street homeless, it's somebody that's living in, I don't know, perhaps extremely poor conditions, perhaps there's been a relationship breakdown, lots of different reasons why somebody who might have been reasonably living in a property and then for whatever reason it's become unreasonable for them to remain there. If that can also equal a threat of homelessness, and the council's duties can trigger at that point. So it's making contact with your local council and finding out how they can help you early on is always really useful.
Absolutely. Harry, Christy, do you sort of see a lot of queries like that coming in from people who are sort of not technically street homeless yet, but that are sort of facing that sort of situation?
I think something we do face quite often, something that's really important to remember, is also about it's important not to make yourself intentionally homeless, because it really can restrict how much help you're going to get. So you get a lot of people that might ring up and they'll be like, I'm being threatened that I'm going to get evicted by my landlord. What if I just leave? Will the council put me in a house? And really, we'd all want to say yeah and get that help for everybody. But realistically, with how the demand for social housing and stuff in Manchester at the moment, it really does restrict the help that you would get. So a lot of people are worried when they get threatened with eviction that they need to leave it that there and then something needs to happen. But realistically, if they do that, it could have more of a negative effect on the help that they are going to get. And that is something that I think is really, really important for people to remember, as well as if you are ever threatened with homelessness, phone up, get a little bit of advice, and just find out whether or not you leaving or the steps you might be planning on taking, whether they're going to have more of a worse effect on you or whether they're going to be better.
Yeah, that ties in, because it's people often think they've got to physically leave a property to make a homeless application, whereas that there might be reasonable grounds to make an application. You don't have to physically leave the property to go and make a homeless application. So you can contact the council or contact us for advice if you're in that situation. Before you make any decisions, make sure you're not putting yourself in a worse position, as you say, Krista.
Yeah, I was going to say it ties into as well the bit earlier about the eviction notice period. The whole point of it's not you receive that safe of paper, you have to be out of the house within a week. There is a period of time, and it's good to use that period of time to obviously know that you won't be out of the house immediately, but you can use that period of time as well to kind of figure out what you're going to do next if it looks like, for example, you are going to be evicted. And like Christy said, making sure that you don't potentially do something wrong before you need to. So you contact the council, let them know what the situation is. Don't leave the property until you have to, or until you have the proper advice, you have the proper support, and you know what the best next step is. Yeah,
absolutely. That's really valuable advice, and such a great juncture as well to throw in a comment that's come through on Periscope there from Von Runt, who is he said that Citizens Advice is a brilliant organisation and you're a bunch of great people, and thanks for the support you provide. So thanks to all of you and to everyone, our lovely lot here at Citizens Advice Manchester and Citizens Advice nationwide, of course, because obviously we're a very big Citizens Advice family, and the advice that our advisors do provide is really fantastic quality advice and can help massively in helping people find a way forward. So great work to all of you. So I think moving away from kind of eviction and homelessness, because obviously there's a much broader spectrum of issues, as you say, under sort of some of the private renters might be facing. And before you hit that point of, you might lose your home, we've already touched on slightly earlier the sort of issue around disrepair and sort of actually people needing to get work done in their homes. So Harry, Christy, the sort of what is the sort of frequency, or how, sort of what's the extent of people calling our advice line with issues around disrepair when they're living in private rented accommodation, and what are the first steps that somebody should take if there are things that they need fixing?
Yeah, I'd say very frequently, unfortunately, at the moment, there is quite a sort of high demand in terms of repairs, and that can be very minor things like a broken window all the way up to, a collapsing roof, for example. I suppose the first thing to do is, first of all, if you're able to obviously take pictures, get evidence, collect some evidence, obviously, of what is going on, evidence of things, and then it'd be a case of contacting either your letting agency or landlord. Obviously, they usually have either a repair sort of portal, depending on what kind of organisation you have. If it's quite a big landlord. If it's like an individual landlord, just a case of contacting them directly, telling them obviously what the issue is, requesting that repair is done. Obviously, bear in mind it is the landlord's like statutory duty to do a repair, and that does cover most things in terms of the actual property, like the structure of the property and things like that. Waiting to see if there is a response from that. And obviously, it's always useful to do this in writing, just so you do have evidence. If further on the line you do need to take any further action, you can sort of demonstrate that you've contacted the landlord and you've shown them the sort of state of the disrepair. And then following on from that, it's usually a case of raising a complaint. So if obviously the landlord doesn't respond within a reasonable time period, you can look into raising a formal complaint, which again would either be a sort of written message, letter, email direct to your landlord, or depending on how big, I suppose, your landlord or property agent is, they may have a specific complaints sort of procedure or function that they use.
Yeah. Great. So that's sort of some good initial advice as to sort of what you can do. And just out of interest, in terms of, obviously, I appreciate that at the moment, obviously, coronavirus has thrown us all a little bit for the loop in terms of what is okay, what isn't okay, what is allowed to happen. In terms of entering the property to do repairs, is that all like legal and fine? And are we finding that sort of essentially what I'm asking, I guess, is are landlords claiming that they can't get the repairs done because of coronavirus, or is that a problem, or is that generally?
Yeah, I mean, I have a really good case example of this. I mean, I think a lot of landlords currently are sending around electricians to do sort of mandatory electrical safety checks that I believe have to be done before April. Potentially someone will correct me. What we do find examples of is landlords sending around electricians to do electrical work in houses that need repair. And then, on one side, they'd say, you need to let this man in to do the electrical repair work because obviously landlords can be fined. On the other side, they'll say, oh, we can't send anyone around to do a repair because it's the coronavirus restrictions. As far as I'm aware, the repair work can be undertaken as long as the repair people are following correct social distancing and wearing correct PPE and things like that.
Okay, great. I think it's often, we know that there are sometimes loopholes that people try to find in order to sort of not get those repairs done. So if those sort of if that disrepair sort of builds and they don't sort of take the appropriate action, and they've not followed process, and you've taken those initial steps, kind of how would that escalate, and at what point then does that come to you, Vicky?
I mean, I think if somebody's been reporting a repair to the landlord and isn't getting anywhere with that, it may meet the criteria to be passed on to our team. As I said earlier, if there is a threat to health or safety, so we're talking about the larger scale, maybe structural problems, most commonly damp issues, basically, or structural issues like the roof. Maybe there's been leaks, and we've seen people with large holes in their roof and leaking water coming through. Excessive dampness and mold growth from the property, which obviously has the potential to cause a lot of health problems for people, particularly people with underlying issues such as asthma. So, I mean, essentially the legal action is to take court action against the landlord to force them to complete the repairs. But there is a pre-action protocol for housing disrepair cases. So there is a set of guidelines that we have to follow before a case can be taken to court. And the purpose of that protocol is to try and resolve the issue without it having to go to court, which it often does. We would be telling the landlord that we're involved, explaining the details of what the repair is, how it's affected the tenant, how long it's been reported, which ties in with what Harry was saying about having kept the evidence of those reports that you've made to your landlord, so that we've got the evidence of that. Usually that will result in the landlord doing some sort of inspection and confirming to us what repairs are required. But if not, we can sometimes get an independent surveyor out to come out so we've got evidence of disrepair. And also an independent surveyor's opinion on what works are required, because I tend to hear a lot of complaints from people who perhaps the landlord isn't ignoring them necessarily, perhaps the landlord's sending operatives around to have a look at the disrepair, but patching repairs up, so not really doing the right works to get rid of the problem for good. And if we're able to get an independent surveyor's report, we can get an opinion on exactly what work is required to get rid of the problem for good. And if we get that evidence, we will force a landlord to do the repairs in the schedule. But another point earlier on, though, is that you can report these repairs to your local council, to the Environmental Health Department, and the council has powers in some circumstances to serve notices on landlords to get them to complete repairs, and that can often be a quicker process as well, and you can do both at the same time as well.
You can always escalate it to your MP as well if no one else is actually doing it. Because sometimes environmental health, in theory, it's always a good idea, but sometimes it can be a little bit difficult, which it is always worth, if that ever happens, your MP, always try and contact your local MP, your local councillor. They can try and get environmental health, try and get them to come out and have a look.
Yeah.
I would say as well, I think that does come up quite often is people with, repairs varying from minor to very serious. They ask about withholding rent, and obviously I would say that withholding rent is never a good idea in regards to trying to take action on disrepair. It's be a case of making sure you are keep paying the rent so you don't build up rent arrears and then put yourself forward for potential eviction. Obviously, there is a process to deal with the repairs and there's a process to deal with the rent, and it's good to keep them separate. And as good as it might feel to kind of withhold rent from a landlord due to disrepair issues, it's never really going to end well. So I would really advise that make sure you are paying the rent, and then whilst making sure you are paying the rent, start this process of raising a complaint, contacting the council, contacting your councillors and things like that.
Great.
I was going to say, but just quickly, whilst we are on the topic of repairs, it is also worth just noting, if you are ever going to go to your landlord about the repairs you can use, depending on when you did sign your tenancy, you can argue the Fitness for Human Habitation Act. So it can sort of vary on how you can argue. If it did come out in 2019, so if you did sign your tenancy afterwards, you can argue it. If you signed your tenancy beforehand, it can come down to things like when you've renewed or signed a new tenancy, etc. But if that is... If you can, it's definitely worth using it, because it gives you an act to argue. So under the Fitness for Human Habitation Act, you have a duty of care to make sure that I don't have an infestation in my property, to make sure that the structure of my property is okay, and make sure that any repairs that need done in regards to that are fixed. And sometimes people can think, well, a lot of the times that is something we get asked. Actually, clients will ring up and go, well, what act can I use? What part of legislation can I argue? And it can be a little bit, on the spot, you're like, oh, but with that, it is always worth keeping in mind the Fitness for Human Habitation Act. The process is the same, but it just gives you that act to use in your argument.
Yeah, it's a handy little sort of note for something. Yeah. Sometimes, as you say, just the mention of further action of, sounding like what your rights are can make a bit of difference, I think, for some people.
If the landlord thinks you know what you're on about, they'll usually, well, not usually, but they might be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. No, I think exactly. You can never know too much, I think, is always helpful. So we have touched as well, sort of very briefly, on kind of the idea that, it talks about people coming around to do repairs, but then actually, what about if your landlord just likes to enter your property without permission? What are the rules there? Do we see a lot of that? Are we seeing less or more of it during the pandemic? And what can people do in those circumstances?
I'd say less, just obviously due to social distancing. People tend to be visiting houses less, but it's still, I'd say, a recurring issue, and it tends to be tied, I think, to other things. Like if your landlord is coming round consistently breaking that sort of very minor, I'd say, law in terms of like leaving you to have the sort of the right to occupy your home peacefully, it tends to be tied to a lot of other issues, like an overactive landlord. It is, again, I'd say, a case of making a record, keeping a record of when these things happens, and then first of all raising that complaint, raising it in writing. Again, just doing that process whereby you have a sort of record of you raising this as an issue to them.
Yeah, great. That's really helpful. Thank you. I'm just sort of trying to think of all of these things that I know there's so many issues around private renting that people kind of could possibly be coming up with, and I'm trying to cover as many of them as possible so that this can be really valuable. In terms of ending a tenancy on your own terms, so not on an eviction process, but on your own terms, what is the process of getting tenancy deposits back? And I know that this is sort of something that people tend to call up about in terms of the rules around getting your tenancy protected, your deposit protected. So what do people need to be looking out for there?
I'm just going to go for it. So when you pay your tenancy deposit, it should be protected within 30 days. And if not, you can actually claim compensation. Of course, there are rules to go, a process to follow with that. It's always worth, before getting upset, because a lot of the time people ring up and they'll be like, I don't think I'm going to get it back, and then you're getting a bit worked up, get a bit upset, you're stressing yourself out, and then it turns out you find out that it's actually been protected. Always check with the three main tenancy deposit schemes if it has been protected. A lot of the time it's going to stop you from feeling as stressed out as you could end up feeling. And then you can always go through there. So what they'll have is what's called an ADR scheme. So that's an alternative dispute resolution. What that basically is mediation. So the landlord would need to agree to use it. So they'd need to agree to go through that process. But if so, your tenancy deposit scheme is then going to try and help. They're going to work with yourself and the landlord to try and resolve the issue. It's going to stop you having to go to things like court and stuff. So it's always worth. The first thing to do is always check those schemes and see if they have been. Also, check any tenancy agreement or anything. So a lot of the time it will have the information in there. You may have been given handbooks. You may be given information about who it was protected with. Always check your information and see what you've got.
Great. And when it comes to sort of tenancy agreements and sort of written documents, now we know that sometimes those documents don't always exist, so you might not have a formal written tenancy. What are the legalities if you don't have them? What sort of processes could people take to make sure that they're protected?
Your rights still apply. You've still got a legally binding agreement. The only difference is it's a lot more difficult to prove. You've got one person's word against the other, so it's always worth getting the tenancy agreement. But a tenant should never think that they don't have their rights as a tenant just because they don't have it.
And if, for example, you tend to find a lot of cases of there's no tenancy agreement and you're paying in cash, they tend to come together really. So if you are paying in cash, try and get a receipt, try and keep evidence of that, like a rent book if you can get that, for example. But yeah, as long as you have the sort of the skeleton of a tenancy agreement almost, you're paying rent, you're living in a property, you've got a monthly payment, you can basically argue that there is very much a tenancy agreement in existence, which then comes along with all the same rights that a normal person would have with a written one.
There we go. Very helpful to know. Vicky, just sort of coming back to something we touched on with you earlier, and in terms of that sits slightly outside what people might think of as a housing issue, but does come down to it. So in terms of antisocial behaviour, so what sort of work might you do with somebody who's been issued with antisocial behaviour order?
I mean, it's, as you say, it's defence work. So basically, if you have found yourself in a situation where your landlord, be a social landlord, has made an application to court to obtain an antisocial behaviour injunction against you as a result of complaints that have been made against you by your neighbours, then that's something that the specialist housing team can deal with. So to defend that application for an injunction or give advice, and including representation at court. Also, once there is an injunction, the consequences for breaching an injunction are very serious, including contempt of court and committal to prison applications. So it's very serious, and you do need the representation for that type of work. It's quite particular case by case, that type of issue, because you never know if it might be very low level complaints, it might be very serious complaints. But yeah, you should get advice as soon as possible when you're made aware that any court action is against you. Hearings are usually listed quite close to when the application has been made, and sometimes injunctions can be obtained without notice to the person if there's any sort of threat of that you've made any sort of threats of violence or been guilty of violence itself. Then the landlord could go to court and obtain an antisocial behaviour injunction without giving you notice, though you have to receive notice quickly afterwards, and there's going to be a further hearing. But it is important to get advice on that. That's probably something that maybe people might not realise a citizen's advice can help with. But yeah, certainly if it's an injunction application by your social landlord and it's for antisocial behaviour, then get in touch.
Wonderful. That's really helpful. Thank you. And as you say, one of those things that people might not realise comes under Citizens Advice's banner and our remit. I always say, if in doubt, give us a call, because it's quite likely that we'll have an answer for you. So yeah, always worth getting in touch with us. We've had a comment from Kat on Facebook who's saying, private renting is ridiculous how much it costs. The price per month can see around £900 a month for rent in some areas. And, obviously we know that this is a real problem for people. In terms of pricing for people finding housing accessible, are we seeing a lot more issues in terms of people being able to afford and find affordable housing?
I would say what I've come across a lot personally is a lot of clients aren't able to find any private renting. Private rented properties at the moment are so sparse with everything that's happening. I don't know why it's happened, but privately rented properties, they're hard to find. I've tried to find some on behalf of clients just to send the information to them, and it's not possible. And then when you do find one, the rent is extortionate. Rent should really be in line with the average market rent in the area. If you are struggling, if you are claiming benefits, if you're getting housing benefit or universal credit, that can look to help you. There's also something called discretionary housing payment, which is also worth thinking about. So what that is if you're getting a benefit that includes a housing element, so either housing benefit or universal credit with the housing element included, you can make an application for discretionary housing payment. It's always worth remembering there's not a legal right to it. It is discretionary. But what the council will do is they'll look at your circumstances, they'll look at your situation and see whether or not they think that you need the help. Which I think at the moment a lot more people are having to do this because they're finding it's the only way really that they're managing to actually find a property with how expensive it has been at the moment. I've noticed myself, it looks like it's going up.
Yeah. Is that something again that you're having experience of as well, Harry, or
Yeah, I mean, rent prices and housing prices in the country generally are sort of a bit skew at the moment. Obviously, it's down to many deep-rooted issues, but what I would say, if people are obviously being affected by that, and especially if the local area, their property prices are really high, it's always a case of looking into like income maximization. Like, give us a call. Are you getting the right benefits? Are you getting any deductions on your housing benefit or universal credit that shouldn't be there? There's lots of little tiny rules that can change, the amount that you get from £100 to £500 or something. But yeah, I think especially in the coronavirus, people have lost a lot of income, and a lot more people are relying on universal credit. And I think they're starting to realize that in of itself, universal credit, the housing element isn't very generous. So there is a case of making sure that you are accessing all these other support networks that are available. And just making sure that you are getting enough money that you can to pay that rent. And if, for example, you do start to fall into rent arrears, potentially try and call us as soon as possible. Like, you don't want to leave it 3 or 4 months when it builds up. Try and call us as soon as, maybe if there's like 1 month of rent arrears, give us a call. We can give some support with that. But yeah, rent prices are pretty high at the moment and will continue to be so, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't really see those sort of coming down anytime soon. Just sort of, I know we touched sort of briefly on it earlier, the idea of, obviously, when we talk about income maximisation and sort of making sure that you're claiming any benefits that you're entitled to, but actually how that sometimes interacts with private renting and people, landlords making statements that they won't take people who are in receipt of benefits. Again, is it something we're seeing more of? And I know that you sort of said that they can't do that, but how, again, can people assert their rights in terms of being able to access properties?
Well, with DSS claimants, a lot of it is actually coming down to the mortgage provider. So a lot of buy-to-let mortgage providers will only have a term where you can only rent out a property basically to tenants that are working. So benefit claimants are being discriminated against, and some of it is indirect. Some of it may come down to the landlord. Some just may not want to rent to tenants that are claiming benefits. Some it is coming down to the tenancy agreement. So it's one of those things where it's not as simple, not the tenancy agreement, sorry, it's coming down to a lot of mortgage agreements. So sometimes it's not as simple as just arguing, well, actually, you can't do that, so you need to let me rent the property. Some people have legally binding agreements that do not let them do it. Now, from the information that I have looked at since the time that I've noticed it's really become an issue, I have looked into it quite a lot in regards to Shelter, and Shelter have given a lot of information explaining that this is something that, they are even arguing needs to be changed. It is discrimination. It's kind of indirect from who it's coming from, but it is discrimination against people that are, not exactly financially better off. And hopefully, if they keep fighting it, it will eventually change. The basics of it is that they're not allowed to do it.
Okay, great. So I'm aware that we're running towards the end of time, and I want to make sure that sort of there's nothing that we've missed, or I'm sure we've missed plenty. There's so much to cover in terms of private renting, unfortunately. But I'm going to come to each of you in turn, and just to wrap up, is there anything, if you sort of could only give one extra piece of advice to people, what is it that you'd want people to know about sort of protecting themselves in private rented properties? So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Vicky. I'm afraid I'm gonna come to you first.
I was just thinking about what we've talked about. We've all kind of said the same thing about getting advice as early as possible, because we do have that 2 levels of help available. We've got the great people on Advice Line who can help you. So even if it's not progressed into what would be classed as a specialist issue, you still can get some really great quality advice that can be really useful and may even prevent it getting to the stage where you want a specialist, which is obviously better. And I think just what we touched on earlier about because of what's going on with the pandemic, there's lots of things in the media, and I think people read lots of different articles about lots of different things and think that applies to their case, rightly or wrongly, and either worry too much because some things or don't worry enough. So there's lots of people have different opinions on things, and it's all over at the moment. So it's just you're never going to be in a worse position by ringing us up and getting some advice. I think that's the biggest thing.
Wonderful, thank you. Harry, I'm going to come to you next.
I guess what we've kind of touched on it, I suppose, but the worst case scenario is sort of an illegal eviction. I think is something that you see a lot. For example, if people suddenly feel like they're forced out, or the locks are being changed on their house, for example, just to be aware, there's lots of support available for that, and especially the council and I believe our housing team as well will be able to offer assistance with illegal evictions. And it's just a case of, if this does happen to you, first of all, make sure you get in touch with either ourselves, the council, any sort of support service to get help with it. And I mean, don't try and force your way into the property or anything like that. Make sure you do everything the sort of correct way, so that when it comes down to it, you'll be able to re-enter that property. But yeah, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're like, wait a minute, I was evicted illegally, they didn't follow this process that I'm now, they should have done, there's definitely support available for that as well. It's just a case of finding that support and enforcing your rights. So yeah, I think especially in the coronavirus, you see illegal eviction a lot. It's all of a sudden landlords don't want tenants who might have missed 1 month of rent, or they just kind of want the house back to themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons, but yeah, I think with illegal evictions, that's something you should definitely give us a call, or Shelter, or the councils, who will be able to give some support with it.
Great, thanks, Harry. And Christy, last but not least.
To be honest, I'd say Harry and Vicky pretty much hit the nail on the head. Always ring and get the advice. One thing that I would always say, and one thing that I tell my clients, is don't compare yourself to your friends. A lot of the time a client will say, but this happens to my friends, or but my friend got to do this. Every person's situation is different. You have a different tenancy agreement. You have different rights. Your rent is different. everything is different. Even if your rent's the same, it's different. You've got a different tenancy agreement. So it's always best not to compare yourself, because that's just adding to the stress as well. Contact us. We'll always do our best. And if it is something that we can refer to our lovely Vicky, it will get referred over. If not, we're on our advice line. We will always do our best to try and help and give you the advice that can try and prevent these sorts of things that are happening. Like Harry said, there are other things out there. Contact the council, contact shelter, contact anybody really that you think is a decent advice service that is going to get you the advice that you need sooner rather than later. Don't leave it until the last minute, because once you leave it to the last minute, you're really not leaving yourself much time, and there's not really an argument to extend it because you've left it to the last minute. Always just think, right, the second you receive a notice, the second you receive a letter, the second you receive something that is making you worried about your housing situation, ring us. It's a free phone number, and the sooner you do it, the easier it is to try and avoid these things from happening.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. So that's our time. Like, these things always fly. So thank you so much to all of you for joining me this evening. I think it's going to be really helpful for people to have picked up some of that stuff around what they can do to protect themselves. And as we've said, do get in touch with us if you are even remotely concerned. Number there at the bottom of the screen, as well as our website. Do stay tuned. And keep your eye on our social media accounts as well. We will be continuing to do our regular Facebook and Periscope live streams every sort of couple of weeks. We haven't actually set the topic for the next one, so if you've got any suggestions, do let us know. And I hope you all have very wonderful evenings. So thanks very much for your time. Good night.
Thank you.